The report came in at dusk. Ashkaro scouts, 6 of them, moving along the low ridge past Thornpass. I should have sent a full column. Instead, I took 12 of my best, because I wanted to see their faces when we caught them on our own ground, and because for 3 years I had let my hatred of that pack make my decisions for me. That was my first mistake. Orlik argued against it in the courtyard before we rode out, quietly, the way he always argues with me when he thinks I am about to do something my grandmother would have called proud rather than wise. 12 is enough to catch 6 scouts, he said. It is not enough if 6 scouts is a lie meant to draw us thin. Ashkaro doesn't lie with numbers, I said. They lie with silence. 6 scouts on our ridge means 6 scouts, and I want them taken before they report back what they've seen of our watch rotations. He didn't push further. That is the trouble with Orlik. He has known me since we were pups baiting each other off the cliff paths above the reach, and he knows when a command is really a command, and when it is me wanting something and dressing it up as strategy. That night, it was the latter, and both of us knew it, and I rode out anyway. We took the low path along Thornpass in the failing light. 12 riders strung loose along a game trail that hugs the ravine's northern lip. Gorse and black pine, crowding close enough on either side that a wolf could lose sight of the rider ahead of him if he wasn't careful. I rode near the front, with Orlik 2 lengths back and the rest fanned wide behind at his signal, and somewhere in that formation, I did not know it then, would not have been able to name her had you asked me, rode a scout 3 ranks back named Briar, who had run those same low paths for 6 years without a single wolf in my hall troubling to learn her face. We found the sign of the 6 scouts easily enough, boot prints pressed fresh into the mud below the ridge, a cold cook fire not yet a day old. Too easily, if I am honest, and I knew it even as satisfaction warmed me, because satisfaction is a poor substitute for caution, and I have never once in 9 years of ruling learned to tell the difference between them quickly enough. I called a halt to study the fire pit. That was when Orlik came up alongside me to report the ridge clear to the south, and that was the breath, one breath, no longer, in which I looked away from the tree line to answer him. One breath. That was all it took for the 7th scout, the one our count had missed, crouched low in the gorse not 4 strides from my exposed back with a blade already drawn, to come up out of the brush like the ground itself had opened. I heard the pack scatter into shouting before I understood why. Orlik's voice, sharp with a fear I had rarely heard in him, hooves wheeling. I turned too slowly. I always turn too slowly when I am angry. And I was angry that whole ride, angry at Ashkaro, angrier at myself for 12 years of watching this border, and never once feeling as safe standing on it as I pretended to my hall I did. The blade was already falling toward my throat when she hit me sideways. I did not know her name yet. I knew only, in the half-second before impact, that someone had closed a distance no one in that formation should have been able to close in time. She had been 3 ranks back, hemmed by riders on both sides, and yet she was there, already there, as though she had begun moving before the raider had finished rising from the brush. The blade that should have opened my throat opened her side instead, below the ribs, deep enough that I heard the sound it made. A sound I have heard too many times on too many battlefields and have never once gotten used to. She did not cry out. She simply folded against me, one hand fisting hard in my cloak as though even wounded her body's first instinct was to hold on rather than fall, and looked up at me with an expression that was not pain yet, not fully, something closer to surprise, as if her own body had done this without asking her permission first. "You're bleeding," I said, which was a foolish thing to say to a woman who had just taken a blade meant for my heart, but it was the only thought my mind could hold. "So were you about to," she said, voice steady even as her knees buckled under her. "Someone had to spend it." I do not remember disarming the raider who had done it. Orlik told me afterward that I broke his arm in 2 places and left him for the healers rather than the crows, Mercy I did not feel in the moment and do not fully understand even now, looking back on it. I remember only gathering her up. She weighed almost nothing, which frightened me more than the wound itself, while Orlick bellowed for the column to reform and ride hard for the reach, and I remember the whole way back with one hand pressed flat against a wound that was not mine, feeling her blood go warm and then start, terribly, to cool between my fingers, and thinking, with a clarity that shamed me down to the bone, I do not even know her name. Greywatch Reach is not a soft place. It was built into the cliff face 3 generations before me, stone stacked on stone by wolves who learned the hard way that a border pack cannot afford to be beautiful, only defensible. Our great hall has no tapestries. Our healer's hall has no windows, so the light stays even and no wolf lying on those tables can tell whether it is dawn or dusk while the healers work. I had spent more hours of my life in that windowless room than anywhere else in the Reach that called itself mine, patched from raids, from border skirmishes, from the long war with Ashkaro that had cost me an uncle, and 3 years before this, the mate I had once believed I was owed, and who had chosen, in the end, an easier life with an easier wolf on softer ground far from any border at all. I had sworn, after that, never to sit vigil in that room for anyone but kin and sworn warriors. Duty, I told myself, was a cleaner thing to give a wolf than hope. I sat for her anyway. Orlick found me there past midnight, still in my ridge-worn coat, still with her blood dried dark along my forearm where I had not thought to wash it, because washing it felt, obscurely, like an act of forgetting. Her name is Briar, he said, because he knew that was the question sitting underneath everything else I had not yet asked. Falconer's Line, runs the low scout paths, has for 6 years. Best eye on the ridge for weather sign, though you'd never know it from how the roster treats her. Quiet about her own worth, always has been. 6 years, I said, and I don't know her face. No reason you would, Orlick said, and there was something careful in how he said it, something that told me there was more and that he did not want to be the one to hand it to me. Her father was Cashin. The name landed like a stone dropped into still water. Every wolf in Greywatch knew the name Cashin, the way every wolf knows a story kept alive to shame someone into obedience. Cashin, who had commanded the Eastern Line 11 years ago at the Battle of the Hollow Ford, and who had, so the story went, so the story had gone for 11 years, told and retold at every council meeting where a young commander needed reminding what cowardice cost, frozen. Ordered a full retreat when a push forward would have broken Ashkaro's flank for good and ended, perhaps, the whole grinding war years early. Cost us the ford. Cost us 3 more years of raids we might otherwise have finished in a single hard afternoon. He had been stripped of rank before the whole haul, and when he died 2 winters later of what the healers called a wasting grief, though no one in the Reach said aloud grief for what, his daughter had inherited nothing from him but his name and the full, unshared weight of it. She's carried a coward's name on her back for 6 years of running our hardest paths, I said slowly, and tonight she put herself between a blade and my throat. That's the part I came to tell you, Orlick said, and Orlick does not hesitate. I had known him since we were pups, and he does not hesitate, but he hesitated now. I pulled the old dispatches tonight while the healers worked, not the ones read out at his stripping, the originals filed and forgotten. Cashin didn't freeze at Hollow Ford, Draven. Ashkaro had already broken and were running by the time he gave the order. He called the retreat because they were running toward their own wounded, dozens of them, laid out in the mud past the ford, and pressing forward would have meant riding our own line straight through them. He chose not to. Command called it cowardice because it cost us the ground. It wasn't cowardice. It was the only decent thing done that whole ugly day, and it ruined him for it. I sat with that a long moment, in a windowless room, with a stranger's blood drying on my sleeve. Why has no wolf said this in 11 years? Because the wolves who signed that report are the same wolves still sitting on my council, Orlick said quietly. Renlo chief among them. And because his daughter never once asked anyone to clear his name, she just kept running the low paths, doing her work, taking every worst shift without complaint, as though she believed that if she was quiet enough and good enough for long enough, it might one day matter on its own. I looked through the open door at the table where the healers still worked, at the slight, still shape beneath their hands, and I felt something move in my chest that I did not yet have a name for, not the wolf's usual hard clench of alarm or fury at a threat, but something slower, heavier, that settled down into my ribs as though it intended to stay there permanently. "Get me every dispatch," I said. "Tonight, if the archive keeper has to be dragged from his bed to fetch them." She did not wake for 2 days. I am not, by nature, a patient wolf. My court will tell you carefully, when they believe I am not listening, that I run my hall the way I ran my patrols. Fast, exacting, with very little tolerance for waiting on anyone or anything. But I sat with her, that first night and most of the second day, not because any duty demanded it. No duty demanded it, that was the strange, unmooring truth I kept turning over, but because some part of me had decided, without troubling to consult the rest of me, that it would not be standing anywhere else. Renlo came to find me there on the second morning, ostensibly to discuss the Ashkaro raider we'd taken alive, though I understood within the first few words that this was not truly why he had come. "You've been in this room a full day, my king," he said, with the particular carefulness of an old wolf choosing his words around a younger one he no longer entirely trusts. "The council wonders whether the border needs its alpha more than a scout needs her king. The border has Orlik holding it capably in my place for 1 day," I said, without looking away from her. "I am not going anywhere, Renlo." "She is a scout," he said, as though the word itself explained everything he wished me to understand: her rank, her worth, the shape of the debt I owed her, all of it made small and orderly by that single word. "A fine one, I'm told, but there are protocols for honoring bravery in the ranks, a commendation, a rank advancement perhaps once she's healed. There is no need for," he gestured vaguely at the room, at me, at the whole unprecedented shape of an alpha king keeping vigil over a border scout, "for this." "Her name is Briar," I said, "Cashin's daughter." I watched something flicker across Renlo's face, there and gone, quick enough that a wolf who did not already suspect him might have missed it entirely. I did not miss it. It was the particular flinch of a wolf being reminded of a lie he helped bury. "I have read the dispatches from Hollow Ford," I said, before he could recover himself. "The real ones, not the version read aloud at his stripping. I know what her father actually did on that field, Renlo, and I know who decided the truth was inconvenient enough to bury." His face did not fully drain of color, but it went carefully, deliberately still, the stillness of an old wolf calculating how much ground he could afford to give. "That was 11 years ago," he said finally. "Different council, different pressures. We were losing 3 raids a season to Ashkaro, and the pack needed someone to answer for the Ford. So you gave them Cashin," I said, "because the truth was that no one was to blame but the war itself, and a pack in that much pain needed a name to hate more than it needed the truth." He did not deny it. That, more than anything, told me everything I needed to know. "I will be correcting the record," I said, "publicly, before the full council and the hall. I would rather you resign your seat with dignity before that happens, Renlo, than have the correction made an accusation aimed at you specifically. But it will be made, one way or the other, and soon." He left without another word, and I understood, watching him go, that I had just made an enemy of a wolf who had sat on my council since before I was born, and that I did not, sitting in that windowless room with Briar's blood still faintly staining the floorboards, care in the slightest. It was on the second night, alone again, that I understood fully what had actually happened on that ridge. I had been turning it over since Orlik first told me her name. 6 years of running the hardest, loneliest paths a border pack has to offer. 6 years of a haul that would not meet her eyes. 6 years of carrying a dead man's shame like a stone sewn into her boot. And still, when the blade came for me, she had closed a distance no trained reflex should have allowed, because some instinct older than reason had told her in that single breath that this at least was hers to spend. I had heard, as a pup, my grandmother's stories of the old Ward bloodlines, families, mostly forgotten now, who carried in them not merely loyalty but a compulsion for interposition, bone-deep and involuntary, to place themselves bodily between danger and whoever they had bound themselves to protect. It was not a gift any wolf chose. It came on some in a single heartbeat of crisis and never showed itself again in an otherwise peaceful lifetime, if the wolf who carried it was fortunate enough never to be tested. My grandmother always said it ran too thin now, diluted across too many generations to be trusted as more than folk tale. I did not believe in folk tales. I believed in the plain fact of Briar's hand closing hard in my cloak before I had even finished turning my head, faster than trained reflex, faster than duty, faster than anything but instinct finally loosed after years spent coiled tight and unused. I did not feel the bond the way the old songs claim it comes, no thunderclap, no single instant where the world resolved itself entirely around one face. What I felt, sitting in that dim room with her blood still dried under my nails, was quieter than that and stranger, a kind of settling, low and certain, the way a hound goes suddenly still when it finally finds the scent it has been circling all morning without knowing it. Not urgency, certainty, as though some part of me had already known and had simply been waiting, patient as stone, for the rest of me to catch up. I told no one what I felt. I did not fully understand it myself yet. I knew only that when her breathing caught and stuttered near dawn on the second night, I was on my feet before the healer even turned toward the sound, and I did not sit back down until it evened out again beneath my hand. She woke on the third morning, with the low gray light through the door crack falling across her face, and the first thing she did, before she asked where she was, before she asked how badly she was hurt, was try to sit up and check with her own eyes that I was unharmed. "Lie down," I said, more roughly than I meant, because my hands had moved to stop her before I had consciously decided to move them at all. "You're not bleeding," she said, as though that single fact settled every other question in the room, and let herself be pressed back, though I could see plainly what obedience cost her stubborn nature. "No," I said, "because you bled instead." She looked at me for a long moment then, the first time I realized that she had ever looked at me directly, without the careful, practiced deference the rest of my haul wore around me like armor. "That was rather the idea," she said. "It was a foolish idea. It worked." I sat with her through the fever that came and went in the following days, through the long hours when she slept and the shorter, harder ones when she was lucid enough to be visibly embarrassed by how much fuss I insisted on making. She told me so, more than once, in the dry, unornamented voice I was quickly coming to know as entirely hers. She did not once ask for anything. She did not mention her father, or the 11 years his name had cost her, or the 6 years she had spent proving herself, unthanked, to a pack that had never once acknowledged the debt. When she talked at all, she talked about the falcons, how her father's old bird still favored the eastern thermals at dusk, how a scout could read a coming storm 3 days out if she knew which cloud shapes to trust. She talked about small, unimportant things, as though she had trained herself so thoroughly never to ask for more than the smallest possible space in any room that she genuinely did not know how to occupy a larger one, even now, even offered freely. It was on the 5th day, once her fever had finally broken for good and color had crept back into her face, that I told her what Orlick had found and what I intended to do with it. I watched something in her go very still. 11 years, she said quietly, and no wolf thought to tell me. "I am telling you now," I said, "and I intend to tell the whole haul publicly without softening a word of it. Not because you asked. You never once asked. which I understand now was its own quiet and considerable courage, but because it is the truth, and because your father deserves to be remembered as the wolf who chose mercy over ground, not the one who lost it out of fear. She did not cry, though I saw plainly what it cost her not to. He used to say the ford wasn't worth what holding it would have taken from us, she said. I always thought he meant the wolves we'd lose taking it back. I didn't understand until now that he meant theirs. He was a better wolf than this hall let him be remembered as, I said. So, I am learning quickly, is his daughter. I brought the dispatches before the full council 4 days later, in the great hall, with every wolf who had signed the original report present to hear the true account read aloud, unedited, in Orlick's steady voice. I will not pretend it was received with any grace. 2 of the older council members left before Orlick had finished. Renlo, true to his word, or perhaps only to his own dignity, had already resigned his seat and did not attend at all. A 3rd member, a grizzled quartermaster named Dessay who had served under Cashin herself at the ford, stayed through the whole reading with her jaw tight, and when it was done she stood, unbidden, and told the hall plainly that she had suspected the truth for years and had been too much a coward herself to say so aloud. It was not absolution. It was, at least, honesty, which was more than that hall had offered Briar in 11 years combined. Briar stood beside me through all of it, still moving carefully, still favoring the side that had taken the blade, and she did not say a single word until it was finished. When it was, she turned not to the hall, not to the departing council, to me, and said, "You didn't have to do that in front of everyone." "Yes," I said, "I did. You spent 11 years listening to your father's shame spoken aloud in this hall. I was not going to correct it in whispers behind closed doors where it could quietly disappear again." Something moved across her face then that I had not yet seen there. Not gratitude, exactly, though gratitude was folded somewhere inside it. Something closer to a woman setting down, at last, a weight she had carried so long and so silently that she had half forgotten it was a weight at all, rather than simply the shape of her own back. "I didn't do it for a reward," she said. "The ridge. I want you to understand that clearly. I didn't throw myself in front of that blade hoping you'd clear my father's name in exchange." "I know," I said. "That is precisely why you deserve to have it cleared regardless." We stood there a moment, in the great hall, council members still filing out uneasily around us, and I understood, with the same quiet certainty I had first felt in that windowless room, that I was not going to let this be the end of what had begun between us. I had spent 3 years since my last betrayal telling myself that a mate was a weakness a border king could not afford, that love was a door best kept bricked shut for the sake of the pack I was sworn to defend. I had repeated that lie to myself, so often I had nearly come to believe it as fact rather than fear. It had taken a woman I barely knew, throwing herself bodily into a blade meant for my heart, to show me the lie plainly for what it had always been. Ashkaro tested us again within the fortnight, a smaller raid, probing the eastern approach while our attention was still turned inward toward the council's upheaval. I rode out with a full column this time, no pride in the decision, only sense, and Briar rode with the scouts near the rear, still healing, under strict order from the healers to stay well clear of any engagement. She did not stay clear. When one of my younger warriors, barely past his first pack year, stumbled into a raider's path and froze, I saw her break formation before I had even fully registered the danger. The same terrible, instinctive speed, the same bone-deep compulsion that had put her between a blade and my throat weeks before, now carrying her toward a wolf who was not even mine by blood, simply because he was hers to protect the instant she perceived him in danger. She reached him in time. It cost her nothing that night but a torn sleeve and a healer's stern lecture. But riding back afterward, I understood something I had not fully grasped before. This was not a debt she had spent once on a single desperate ridge and could now set down. It was the shape of who she was, bone deep and permanent. And if I wanted her beside me, I would spend the rest of both our lives learning to live alongside a wolf who would always, without hesitation, place herself between danger and whoever she had claimed as hers. I did not want to change that in her. I understood, watching her stitched up yet again by the same weary healers, that I wanted instead to be worthy of standing beside it. I did not claim her that week or the one after. I am not, whatever the old songs like to insist of alpha kings, a wolf who mistakes urgency for wisdom. I gave her the time she needed to heal fully, and I spent it the way I should have spent the 11 years before it, learning her properly without the excuse of crisis forcing us together. I learned that she read the weather off the exact color of the ravine mist before any scout's formal report ever reached my desk. I learned that she had trained her father's falcon herself, after his death, because she could not bear to sell the bird and could not bear to let it go untended either, and that she still flew it most evenings along the same eastern thermals he had favored. I learned that she laughed rarely, but that when she did, it startled a warmth into her whole face that made the rest of the hall seem dimmer by comparison for hours afterward. I learned that she had never once, in 6 years of hard service, asked Greywatch for a single thing that was not already owed to her plainly by right. I gave her, in turn, the one thing I had not offered anyone since the betrayal that had hardened me, the plain, unguarded truth of what I felt. I don't know the song's proper words for this, I told her one evening, on the cliff walk above Thornpass Ravine, the same ridge where she had first bled for me. I have heard wolves speak of the bond arriving like a thunderclap. It was not that for me. It was quieter. It was the sense, sitting beside you in that windowless room while you fought for your life, that some part of me had already decided, long before I understood it myself, that wherever you were standing was where I was meant to stand as well. She was quiet a long moment, watching the last copper light fade over the ravine where she had nearly died for a wolf she barely knew. I used to think, she said finally, that being useful was the only kind of belonging a wolf like me was permitted. Do the work, take the hardest shifts without complaint, never ask for the room to hold more of me than it was already willing to give. I didn't throw myself in front of that blade because I loved you, Draven. I didn't know you well enough yet to love you. I did it because some part of me had already decided, without my permission, that you were mine to keep safe, whether this hall ever made room for the rest of me or not. I have room for you, I said, all of you. I intend to spend considerably longer than 11 years proving that plainly, and often, until you no longer have to wonder whether I mean it. She looked at me then, steady, the way she had first looked at me the morning she woke, without deference, without the careful smallness this hall had trained so deeply into her. Then don't clear my father's name and call the debt settled, she said. Don't make a public gesture of me and think that closes the account. I didn't take that blade to be repaid, Draven. If you want to give me something real, give me the ridge back, let me stand it as Cassion's daughter, not his shame, and let that on its own be enough. I have led this pack 9 years. I have made harder decisions on colder mornings than that one. None of them settled into me the way that single promise did. You will stand it as more than that, I said. You will stand it as mine, not instead of Cassion's daughter beside it, never replacing it. I am not asking you to set down who you already are in order to become what I need. I am asking to stand that ridge beside you for whatever years are left to either of us, and to spend every one of them making certain no wolf in this hall ever again mistakes your quiet for smallness. She did not answer with a vow, or a kneeling, or any of the grand gestures the old songs would have written for a moment like that one. She answered by reaching for my hand, the same hand that had pressed hard against her wound the night she nearly died in my place, and holding it, not as a claiming, not as ceremony, as two wolves who had already, in the smallest and truest way possible, chosen each other on a blade's width margin between a raider's steel and my own unguarded back. We did not marry with pageantry. Greywatch is not a soft place, and neither of us wanted a soft ceremony to mark what had actually passed between us. We stood instead at Thornpass itself, at dawn, with Orlick as witness and the entire scouting line assembled, the same line that had once looked past her without a second glance, that now looked at her with something closer to reverence than any crown could ever have purchased on her behalf. In place of the traditional royal cloak, I gave her Cassian's restored rank mark, remade fresh in silver, because I had come to understand by then that the honor she truly wanted was never mine to bestow through grand gesture. It was simply the truth, spoken plainly aloud at last, and left standing where every wolf in the Reach could see it. Dissa of all wolves wept openly at the ceremony, and told me afterward gruffly that Cassian would have been proud past words to see his daughter honored as she deserved, and prouder still, she suspected, to see her chosen not for what she could give a king, but for who she had simply always been. Years later, I would still find her some mornings on that same cliff walk, teaching a new falcon the old eastern paths her father had once flown, or drilling a young scout in the low roots with the same quiet exactness she had once used to disappear unnoticed into the back of every gathering. She never did learn to occupy a room the way the old songs claim a queen ought to, with noise, with spectacle, with a presence that fills every corner on arrival. She occupied it instead the way she always had, plainly and completely, by being the one wolf in it who would not hesitate, not for a single heartbeat, to close whatever distance stood between danger and the one she had quietly, irrevocably chosen to love. I have led armies in my time. I have held a border 11 hard years against a pack that wanted it bled dry stone by stone. But the truest thing I have ever learned about protection, I learned from a woman this whole hall had once overlooked entirely, who taught me, with her own blood, on a ridge at dusk, and with every quiet year that followed it, that the deepest devotion a wolf can offer is not the crown he places on someone's head. It is the price he is finally, humbly willing to let someone else pay for him once, and the rest of a lifetime he spends, gladly and without complaint, trying to be worth it.